The story I am about to tell you begins with a letter that I received in about 1992 or 93. Everything that occurred and related to that letter is what I'm going to tell you now. First, some history. When the Germans invaded Russia in June 1941, their path led straight through what was known as White Russia or Belarus. Unfortunately, the Yakovlevich family was also in that path. Dad had been collecting money from his brothers, sending that money to a bank in Russia for the family. He'd also buy clothing, particularly for his sisters. He would buy dresses and mail them back to his sisters left behind in Russia. But when the dust cleared from the German invasion and Dad no longer heard from his sisters and from his brother, he knew that the family had suffered great casualties. So from that time on, he had little to say, except every once in a while, I would like to hear from my sisters. Now we come to the letter I received in the early 1990s. It was postmarked Penza, a city in Russia about 150 miles south of Moscow. Of course, it was written in Russian. I opened it and I couldn't make much sense of what it said, so I needed a translator. I called a patient of mine who was a professor of French language at Rice. She said, we don't have anybody at Rice who can translate that, but try Dr. Harry Walsh. He's professor of Russian culture at University of Houston. Thus began a remarkable friendship. I called Harry and told him I needed someone to translate a letter. He said, send it to me and I'll email you back a translation. His reaction was prompt. I very quickly got the email translating my cousin's letter. I learned it was from Raquel. She was a daughter of Israel Yakovlevich, the oldest of the Yakovlevich brothers, who had stayed behind while his brothers went to America. He was his wife were designated to take care of members of the family, particularly their parents. Raquel's letter was lengthy, repetitive, and sad to read. She talks about being alone. She and her husband were alone. Her children were no longer near her. She wanted to be in contact with family in far-off America, as she said. And so the letters continued on, and I responded and encouraged members of the family to respond. I want to deal with our relationship with each member of whom I will talk about. Time will go back and forth, but I will try to keep matters straight. Harry continued to translate letters for us, translated birthday greetings. He became part of our family. He joined us for meals. He and his wife Sandra came to my birthday parties. He became a real jewel. He became very closely tied to the family. And when Raquel died many years later, he donated a book in her memory to the University of Houston Library. The book was The Shoah in Ukraine, which was the history of how Ukraine fared under the German invasion. Next, I heard from Raquel in one of Raquel's letters that her brother was still in Russia. He was a doctor. His wife was a doctor. And he was in charge of a clinic for the employees of the airport at Evaptoria in the Crimea. That contact became more interesting. I heard from David. He said he wanted to go to America. I reminded him that there was no place on the quota of Russians or Jews to come to America. So he said, let's try to make a visit. So I filled out papers. He filled out papers. But by the time we did all that, I found that he had taken his family and headed for Israel. The reason, it turns out, was that his grandson, Oleg, who was the light of his life, had come home complaining that at school he had been called a dirty Jew and had been put upon and bullied by his classmates. He had packed all his luggage, all his family belongings, and headed for Israel. He had to make a brief stop in Vienna, but a couple days later he headed for Israel. I sent a notice to David Shamovitz, who lived with Marcia, his wife, and his children, that I would like for him to meet David and help him, that there needed to be a place for David and his family to live. David, in his letters, had said he heard that immigrants were living in tents, and that worried him a great deal. I heard from David that he had rented an apartment for $6,000, and that would be good for a year. The apartment was in Beersheba. When David and family arrived in Israel at the airport, they walked towards the waiting room, but David and Marcia were unable to meet them. A friend took their place, and he met David and handed him an envelope. And in the envelope it said, "There is an apartment at Beersheba for you and your family. It is good for 1 year." He burst out crying. It was a wonderful experience for him to be met with the greatest of news. He set up housekeeping, he and his wife, his daughter, and his grandchild. They set up an apartment. David and Marcia were great help. Sometime later, Yvette and I, went to visit them. Their apartment was delightful. We were able to talk only in scraps of language. He wanted to talk in Yiddish, and I had forgotten most of our Yiddish. But we gave them gifts. They gave us gifts. They gave us flowers. It was a delightful, delightful get-together to see them so happy. Now back to my desire to go to see my relatives in Russia. Their letters weren't good enough. I asked Faz, Richard, and Sandy, and they were delighted to join me. We found a medical mission and headed for Moscow. We let the family know when we were going to arrive, and they notified us that the day of our arrival, the family from Riga, Latvia, was going to meet us. Now in Riga, one of Raquel's sons, Mikhail, and his wife, Rebecca, and two children, Irina and Matvej, were going to meet us. So we agreed to meet in the lobby of our hotel at 6 o'clock the evening after our arrival. We went down to the lobby at 6 o'clock. The lobby was a big, rather empty place, about the size of a small basketball court. As we stood waiting and talking at the far end of the hotel lobby, 4 people came through the door. Obviously a family, a man, woman, and 2 children. They stood there looking around, hesitating to move, as though they didn't want to make a mistake. At a moment, the little boy walked straight across the lobby and came to stand in front of us. He looked up at us and broke into a big smile. We knew this was part of our family from Riga, Latvia. The child was Matvey, and his parents came over, and we met Mikhail, Rebecca, and Irina. Irina was 14. Mikhail, I don't know his age or Rebecca's age, but Matvey, who later became Matt, was 12. We spent time together. We saw parts of Moscow together. Rebecca spoke very good English. Mikhail, not at all. The children were very quiet, seemed to be somewhat frightened. Later, and I'm going to move forward, after we returned to the United States, Matt came to visit us. His mother sent him to spend time to meet relatives and see the United States. He was about 16 at the time, and he came to visit, staying at Sandy and Fuzz's home. He stayed about 7 weeks and became the subject of our attention to learn how to be a teenager in the United States. Fuzz taught him to shower daily, to change jeans daily, which meant they had to go buy jeans. He learned to use deodorant, and Fuzz prescribed some medication for his terrible acne. We took him out eating and buying for things for himself. Fuzz got him a job at the office. That was part of the agreement, that if he became part of a program of travel and work, if he got a job, he could come to the United States, and perhaps a job would help pay for his travels. After leaving us, he went to Denver to spend time with Steve and family, and then on to San Diego with Evie and her 4 children and their families. After that, he traveled across the United States by bus and met Brian, who was at school in New York. Brian remembers that the meeting was very close. Matt didn't say much to him, just left him. As it turned out, Matt was going to visit an aunt on his mother's side of the family. After seeing the sights of New York, he went back home to Riga. We continued to have a great deal more of correspondence. Raquel and her husband Isaac lived alone in an apartment which had been formerly inhabited by Raquel and his brother Gennady, but Gennady and his wife moved to the suburbs of Penza, and of course Mikhail went to Riga, Latvia. We spent a couple of days with Raquel and Isaac. Isaac was somewhat frail, but pleased to be with us, and they had the company of several of their close friends. We spent a lot of time taking pictures. A delightful moment was when we got to the apartment of the friend. Isaac got a prayer book and read a prayer in Hebrew. It was very touching, brought tears to our eyes, how much this meant to us. Now back to Harry Walsh. As I said, he was professor of Russian culture, and when a young man from Dallas came down to his department to learn how to speak Russian, he mentioned that I had family in Penza. It turned out this young man was a member of a church in Dallas, and the church devoted 2 visits every year to a orphanage, and it turned out the orphanage was in Penza. They went in summer and took the children from the orphanage to play outside, have games, and enjoy being out in the sunshine and wind. In the winter, they would have a Christmas party for them. One of the church members was originally from Penza, and it was her idea that the church go to Penza to carry out this wonderful occasion, Dr. Walsh told this man, Michael Miller, that I had relatives in Penza. Michael came to visit us. We took him to dinner, met with Fuzz and Sam, met him and his wife, and encouraged him to visit Raquel and Isaac, which he did. That was a great benefit to us. First of all, they could take money directly, money which we could not send through the mail. They could send letters. They could carry pictures. They continued meeting us several times in the next couple of years and carrying our love and our pictures and letters and money for us. Time has passed. I continued getting letters from Raquel telling us that she would hope we didn't forget her. And a wonderful thing happened on my 95th birthday.